Stalking the petty tyrant. In spite of his explanations, the practical dimension of stalking continued, from my point of view, to be one of the darkest themes in the teachings. Over the years, I accomplished some of the other exercises, like recapitulation and inner silence. I even dreamt. But when I tried stalking, I only got ambiguous results or wound up feeling ridiculous. Apparently, Carlos was aware of my efforts, because at one point he called me and told me, "Don't get complicated. You are making a caricature of the teachings. If you want to stalk, observe yourself. We are all excellent hunters. Stalking is a natural gift. When hunger presses us, we sharpen ourselves. Children cry and achieve what they want. Women entrap men, and men get even with each other, swindling in business. Stalking is to be able to get away with what you want. If you become aware of the world you live in, you will understand that simply staying attentive to it is a kind of stalking, since we learned to do that long before our capacity to discriminate was developed. We feel it as something perfectly natural and hardly ever question it. But all our actions, even the most altruistic, are imbued with the hunter's spirit. Ordinary man doesn't know he is stalking, because his character has been subjugated by socialization. He is convinced that his existence is important, so his actions are at the service of his self-importance, not the expansion of his awareness. He added that one of the characteristics of self-importance is that it betrays us. Important people don't flow. They give themselves airs, show off their attributes, and lack the necessary grace and the speed to hide. Their luminosity is too rigid and can only achieve flexibility when they no longer have anything to defend. The method of sorcerers consists of focusing on the reality in which we live, but in a new way. Rather than just accumulating information, what they seek is to compact their energy. A warrior is someone who has learned to stalk himself and is no longer burdened with a heavy image to present to others. Nobody can detect him if he doesn't want them to, because he doesn't have attachments. He is above the hunter because he has learned to laugh at himself. He told me how his instructor, Doña Florinda Mates, taught him to be inconspicuous. Just at the time when my books transformed me into a rich man, she sent me to fry hamburgers in a highway restaurant. For years, I worked with money in plain sight, with my money in plain sight, without being able to spend it. She said that would teach me not to lose the appropriate perspective, and I learned my lesson. Some time after that, I was given another opportunity to be invisible. I had taken some cactuses to the house of a friend and began to plant them. Suddenly, 2 reporters from the Times, who had spent a long time trying to find me, appeared. They figured I was a peon and asked for the owner of the house. "Knock there," I told them, and pointed at the door. My friend answered their questions. "No, I haven't seen him." And the reporters left, wondering where the hell Castaneda could be. He went on saying that since the problem of self-importance is a personal matter, each warrior should adapt the teachings to his own conditions. Therefore, the stalking techniques are extremely flexible, but the training is the same for everyone. It concerns getting rid of superfluous routines and acquiring enough discipline to recognize the signs of intent. Both achievements constitute true feats of character. The best way of acquiring that degree of discipline is to deal actively with a petty tyrant. In response to my queries, he explained that a petty tyrant is somebody who makes our life impossible. In past times, this kind of people could hurt us physically or even kill us. Nowadays, that kind of petty tyrant practically doesn't exist. However, Because of the high level of importance that we grant ourselves, anyone in a position of bothering us works as a petty tyrant. Far from avoiding it, we should face not the petty tyrant, but our own stupidity. The petty tyrant is necessary because most of us are too lazy to change by ourselves. He moves the fixation of me, making our weakness appear. He makes us see the truth, that we are not important, and he is willing to demonstrate it with actions. To learn how to treat him is the only really effective way to refine stalking. A petty tyrant is so important for the task that it can become an obsession for an apprentice to look for one and get in touch with him. A sincere gratitude is the only appropriate feeling for a warrior who has found one to fit his measure. Petty tyrants are plentiful. What is not plentiful is the guts to look for them, establish a connection with them by means of stalking, and cause their anger, putting oneself within their reach, and at the same time, scheming devastating strategies. Instead, we spend our life running away from situations that produce pain, irritation, fear, or confusion. In that way, we lose one of the most valuable tools that Spirit has put in our path. What is the strategy to confront that kind of enemy? Above all, don't see them as enemies. They are involuntary allies in your own cause. Don't lose sight of the fact that the battle is not fought for the ego, but for energy. The important thing is to win, not for the other one to lose. A petty tyrant doesn't know that, and that is his weakness. In my case, I had the privilege of dealing with several of those people. Although I was never given an encounter of the exquisite quality that my teacher had. He told me that when his apprenticeship began, his main impediment to approaching the art of stalking was impatience. To help him, Don Juan once demanded that he establish a friendship with a certain person who lived in an old age home. When I met him, he turned out to be an annoying old man who was in the habit of telling everyone how in his youth, in the 1920s, he had been witness to a spectacular event. He was sitting in an Italian coffee shop. Suddenly, a car stopped in front of the door, and out came several people, armed with machine guns, who began to shoot towards the establishment. Thanks to his lucky star, my friend could hide under some tables and was unhurt. The anecdote apparently constituted the only treasure in this old man's life. Unfortunately for us who knew him, the old man suffered from amnesia and was always forgetting whom he had told it to. I had to suffer through it again and again for years. Every time I arrived at the retirement home, he would invariably cling to my arm and wonder, "Did I ever tell you how I was attacked by some gangsters?" I felt pity for him, because somehow he made me think of my own uncertain future. But at the end, I had enough. I returned to Don Juan and told him, "I can't stand this old man anymore. He is really infuriating. What is the point of making me visit him?" But Don Juan was inflexible. He ordered that, starting from that day, I had to go visit the old man every day or give up my apprenticeship. Alarmed by this threat, I gathered all my patience and tried to complete the task. Sometimes I fantasized, thinking of the possibility that the old man was not the person he seemed to be. That gave me encouragement to continue with my task. One day when I arrived at the retirement home and asked for my friend, they informed me that he had died. Perceptual Homogenization. That afternoon, Carlos was talking to us about certain characteristics of perception. He told us that human beings have inherited from the dinosaurs the trait of seeing the sky as a blue color. On the other hand, he claimed that our relatives, the primates, see it as a yellow color. Answering a question from someone, he described the world in which we live as a conglomerate of interpretation units. Understanding that this definition was obscure for his listeners, he explained, man belongs to the primate group. His great fortune is that he can achieve unique expressions of awareness due to his capacity for attention and analysis. However, pure perception is always interfered with by the way we interpret. Therefore, our reality molds itself to our description. The goal of sorcerers is to perceive all that is humanly possible. Since we cannot escape our biological condition, let us be sublime monkeys. To perfect our understanding, he added, the path of attention is all we've got. That same night, I had an opportunity to talk with him, and I asked him to break his statements into smaller pieces for me. He said that due to our biological condition, we all work as units of perception, and it is possible for us to make a miracle of attention, perceptual homogenization. What does units of perception mean? I asked. It means that since we are autonomous beings, our perception could also be autonomous. But it is not, because by coming to an agreement with our fellow men, we all perceive the same thing. That extraordinary ability, which began as a voluntary consent aimed at survival, has ended up tying us to our own descriptions. He reaffirmed that the flow of the eagle's emanations is continually new and disconcerting, but we don't see it because we live 3 steps removed from the real world. Our innate sensitivity, our biological interpretation, and our social agreement. Those steps do not happen simultaneously, but their speed is superior to anything we can consciously determine. Because of that, we take for a fact the world we perceive. I asked him to give an example. He answered, imagine that at this moment you witness a group of the eagle's emanations. Automatically you transform it into something sensorial, with characteristics like brightness, sound, movement, etc. Then memory intervenes, which is under the obligation to give everything meaning. And you recognize it, for example, as another person. Lastly, your social inventory classifies it by comparing the person with those you know. That classification allows you to identify him. Already, you are a good distance away from the real fact, which is indescribable because it is unique. The same thing happens with everything we see. Our comprehension is the result of a long process of purifications, or skimmings, as Don Juan called them. We skim everything, and in that way we modify the world that surrounds us to such an extent that there is very little left of the original. Although this situation helps us to live under better conditions, it also enslaves us to our own creation and makes us predictable. When we homogenize our assemblage points, the only things we allow ourselves to perceive are those which do not go against our preconceived idea of the world. We are like horses who, after learning a path, can no longer enjoy their freedom. All they do is to repeat a pattern. That homogeneity is frightful. It is too much. Start thinking. Something is missing. He maintained that any preconceived idea, even something as simple as the names we give things, keep us tied to reason, because it forces us to create mechanisms of judgment. For example, when you say, "I believe in God," in fact, you are saying, "They told me certain ideas, and I have chosen to adopt them. Now I even kill for them." Then you are not the one who decides. It is the other, the implanted judgment. The ideal thing is that you determine your life starting from your own experience. If your beliefs take something away from you, beware. Everything that doesn't make you free enslaves you. Being focused on a particular aspect of the human inventory has two effects. It turns us into specialists in our field, but at the same time, it will fossilize the energy conduits, which will then only react to certain stimuli, saturating ourselves with ideas and opinions. A warrior cannot have the luxury of following people's ways, nor can he be a reactionary, because his freedom means to exercise other alternatives. I asked him which alternatives he meant, but he gave me a pat on the shoulder and told me that it was too late. We will continue another day. Predators of awareness. Our conversation was not resumed until several years had passed. On that occasion, one of his informal meetings, Carlos brought up an entirely new and frightening concept, which gave rise to the most passionate controversies. Man, he said, is a magical being. He has the same capacity to fly into the universe as any one of the millions of awareness that exist. But at some point in his history, he lost his freedom. Now his mind is no longer his own. It is an implant. He claimed that human beings are hostages to a group of cosmic entities who are devoted predators and whom sorcerers call flyers. He said this topic had been secret among the ancient seers, but an omen had told him that the time had come to disclose it. The omen was a picture that his friend Tony, a Christian Buddhist, had taken. In it appeared the sharply outlined figure of a dark and ominous creature floating above a multitude of the faithful gathered among the pyramids of Teotihuacan. My cohorts and I decided that it is time to let you know our true situation as social beings, even at the cost of all the distrust that this information may generate in the public. When I had the opportunity, I asked him to tell me more about the flyers. He then told me one of the most terrifying aspects of Don Juan's world. We are prisoners of beings who came from the confines of the universe, and they use us as casually as we use chickens. He explained, the portion of the universe accessible to us is the operative field of two radically different kinds of awareness. One, which includes plants, animals, and human beings, is a whitish awareness. It is young, a generator of energy. The other is an infinitely older and more parasitic awareness, possessor of an immense quantity of knowledge. Besides men and other beings that inhabit this earth, there is in the universe an immense range of inorganic entities. They are present among us, and occasionally they are visible. We call them ghosts or apparitions. One of those species, which seers describe as enormous, black, flying shapes, arrived here at some point from the depths of the cosmos and found an oasis of awareness in our world. They have specialized in milking us. That is incredible, I exclaimed. I know, but it is the pure and terrifying truth. Have you ever wondered about people's energetic and emotional ups and downs? It is the predator who shows up periodically to pick up his quota of awareness. They leave only enough so that we may continue living, and sometimes not even that. What do you mean? Sometimes they take too much, and the person becomes gravely ill and may even die. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Do you mean we are being eaten alive? I asked. He smiled. Well, they don't literally eat us. What they do is a vibratory transfer. Awareness is energy, and they can align with us. Since by nature, they are always hungry. And we, on the other hand, exude light. The result of that alignment can be described as energy robbery. But why do they do it? Because on the cosmic plane, energy is the most powerful currency, and we all want it. We humans are a vital race, stuffed with nourishment. Every living being eats other beings, and the most powerful always comes out the winner. Who said man is at the top of the food chain? That idea could only have come from a human being. To inorganic beings, we are the prey. I commented that it was inconceivable to me that entities that are even more aware than us could be predatory to that extent. He replied, "But what do you think you're doing when you eat a lettuce or a beefsteak? You are eating life. Your sensibility is hypocritical. Cosmic predators are no more and no less cruel than we are. When a stronger race consumes another, inferior one, it is helping its energy to evolve." I have already told you that in the universe there is only war. The confrontations of men are a reflection of what happens out there. It is normal for one species to try to consume another. A warrior does not complain about it and tries to survive. And how do they consume us? Through our emotions, properly directed by the internal dialogue. They have designed our social environment in such a way that we are constantly shooting off waves of emotions, which are immediately absorbed. Best of all, they like attacks of ego. For them, that is an exquisite mouthful. Such emotions are the same anywhere in the universe where they occur, and they have learned how to metabolize them. Some consume us for our lust, anger, or fear. Others prefer more delicate feelings like love or fondness, but they are all after the same thing. Normally, they attack us around the area of the head, heart, or stomach, where we store the thickest part of our energy. Do they attack animals too? These creatures use everything that's available, but they prefer organized awareness. They drain animals and plants in the part of their attention that is not too fixed. They even attack other inorganic beings, but they can see them and avoid them, as we avoid mosquitoes. The only ones who are completely trapped by them are human beings. How is that possible that all this is happening without us realizing it? Because we inherit the exchange with those beings, almost like a genetic condition, and it feels natural to us. When someone is born, the mother offers it like food without realizing it, because her mind is also controlled. Baptizing the child is like signing an agreement. Starting from there, she devotes herself to installing acceptable behavior patterns. She tames the child, reduces its warring side, and transforms it into a meek sheep. When a boy has sufficient energy to reject that imposition, but not enough to enter the path of the warrior, he becomes a rebel or socially maladjusted. The flyer's advantage stems from the difference between our levels of awareness. They are very powerful and vast entities. The idea that we have of them is equivalent to the one an ant will have of us. However, their presence is painful, and you can measure it in various ways. For example, when they provoke us into attacks of rationality or distrust, or when we are tempted to violate our own decisions. Lunatics can detect them very easily, too easily. I would say, since they feel physically how these beings settle on their shoulders, generating paranoia. Suicide is the stamp of flyers, because the flyer's mind is potentially homicidal. You say that it is an exchange, but what do we gain from such plunder? In exchange for our energy, the flyers have given us our mind, our attachments, and our ego. For them, we are not their slaves, but a kind of salaried workers. They bestowed these privileges on a primitive race and gave us the gift of thinking, which made us evolve. Indeed, they have civilized us. If not for them, we would still be hiding in caves or making nests on treetops. The flyers control us through our traditions and customs. They are the masters of religion, the creators of history. We hear their voice on the radio, and we read their ideas in the newspapers. They manage all our means of information and our belief systems. Their strategy is magnificent. For example, there was an honest man who spoke of love and freedom. They have transformed it into self-pity and servility. They do it with everyone, even with Naguals. For that reason, the work of a sorcerer is solitary. For millennia, flyers have concocted plans to collectivize us. Once they become so shameless that they were even seen in public. Once they became so shameless that they were even seen in public, and people made representations of them in stone. Those were dark times. They were everywhere. But now their strategy has become so intelligent that we don't even know they exist. In the past, they hooked us through our credulity. Today, through our materialism. They are responsible for modern man's ambition not to have to think for himself. Just observe how long somebody will tolerate silence. Why the change in their strategy? Because at this time, they are running a great risk. Humanity is in very quick and constant contact, and information can reach anyone. Either they must fill our heads, bombarding us day and night with all kinds of suggestions, or there will be some who will realize and warn the others. What would happen if we were able to repel those entities? In 1 week, we would recover our vitality and we would be shining again. But, as normal human beings, we cannot think about that possibility because it will go against all that is socially acceptable. Fortunately, sorcerers have one weapon: discipline. The encounter with inorganic beings happens gradually. In the beginning, we don't notice them, but an apprentice begins to see them in his dreams, and then, while he is awake. Something that can drive him crazy if he doesn't learn how to act as a warrior. Once he understands, he can confront them. Sorcerers manipulate the foreign mind, turning into energy hunters. It is for that purpose my cohorts and I have designed tensegrity exercises for the masses. They have the virtue of liberating us from the flyer's mind. In this sense, sorcerers are opportunists. They take advantage of the push they've been given and say to their captors, "Thanks for everything. See you later. The agreement you made was with my ancestors, not with me." When recapitulating their life, they are literally snatching the food out of the flyer's mouth. It is like going to the store and returning a product to the shopkeeper, demanding your money back. The inorganic beings don't like it, but they can't do anything about it. Our advantage is that we are dispensable. There is a lot of food around. A position of total alertness, which is nothing but discipline, creates such conditions in our attention that we don't taste good anymore to those beings. In that case, they turn away and leave us in peace. Losing the mind. In another conversation, Carlos said that our reason is a byproduct of the foreign mind and that we shouldn't trust it. For someone with my mental makeup, this was very difficult to accept. When I asked him about this, he explained that what sorcerers reject is not the capacity of reason to reach conclusions, but the way it is imposed on our life as if it is the only alternative. Rationality makes us feel like a solid block, and we begin to grant the greatest importance to concepts like reality. When we face unusual situations, like those which assault the sorcerer, we tell ourselves, it is not reasonable, and it seems we have said everything there is to say. The world of our mind is dictatorial, but fragile. After some years of continuous use, the self becomes so heavy that it is just common sense to give it a rest in order to continue ahead. A warrior fights to break the description of the world, which has been injected into him, in order to open up a space for new things. His war is against the self. For that purpose, he tries to be permanently aware of his potential. Since the content of perception depends on the position of the assemblage point, a warrior tries with all his might to loosen the fixation of that point. Instead of creating a cult out of his speculations, he pays attention to certain premises of the path of sorcerers. Those premises say that first, only a high level of energy can enable one to deal adequately with the world. Second, rationality is a consequence of the fixation of the assemblage point in the position of reason, and that point moves when we achieve internal silence. Third, in our luminous field, there are other positions every bit as pragmatic as rationality. Fourth, when we achieve a point of view which includes reason as well as its twin center, silent knowledge, concepts like truth and lies stop being operative, and it becomes patently clear that man's true dilemma is to have energy or not have it. Sorcerers reason differently from ordinary people. For them, to anchor attention is insanity, and to make it flow is common sense. They call the fixing of the assemblage point in non-habitual areas seen. Staying sane is imperative, but they have found out that rationality is not always sane. To stay sane is a voluntary act, while to be reasonable is just to fix our attention on an area of collective consent. Are sorcerers opposed to reason, then? I've already told you they are opposed to its dictatorship. They know the center of reason can take us very far. Absolute reason is merciless. It doesn't stop halfway. That's why people are afraid of it. When we are able to focus on it with inflexibility, it generates an obligation to be impeccable, because not to be so is not reasonable. To do things with impeccability is to do all that is humanly possible and a little more. Therefore, reason also takes you to a movement of the assemblage point. To act within the precepts of the warrior's path, you need clarity of purpose, the courage to take on the task, and an unbending intent. If you look around, you will see that most people of reason are not, in fact, located in that center, but on its periphery. Why? Because they lack energy. Their holes prevent them from having any objectivity. Their attention always fluctuates, and because of that, their perception is hybrid. It is ambiguous. They drift like a rudderless boat in the current, at the mercy of their emotions, and without a clear view of either shore. The bank of pure reasoning on one side, the bank of the abstract on the other. What is required of a modern warrior is a condition of sustained energy gain, until his attention can flow between reason and silent knowledge. When moving in that way, he is more sane than ever, and yet he is not a rational being. From whichever position he assumes, he will always be sighting the other side, and his vision acquires perspective and depth. Sorcerers describe this condition as being double, or losing the mind. We can arrive at silent knowledge in exactly the same way as our teachers taught us to arrive at reason, by induction. It is like controlling both sides of a bridge. From one side, you can see reason like a net of agreements, which transforms collective interpretations into common sense through the customs of concern. From the other side, you can sense silent knowledge as an unfathomable creative darkness which extends beyond the threshold of non-pity. Upon crossing this threshold, the ancient sorcerers arrived at the source of pure understanding. To be double is to make a connection with oneself, to flow between 2 points. It is something almost indescribable, but an apprentice experiences it as soon as he saves enough energy. Starting from there, he learns how to deal with reason like a free being, neither reverent nor abject. He acquires what Don Juan called intensity, that is, the capacity to store information in a perceptual block. I found the concept of intensity totally obscure. I asked him to explain it further. He answered that perception is composed of content and intensity. Extreme situations, like a sharp awareness of danger, proximity of death, or the effect of power plants, generate great intensity. A sorcerer learns how to store those experiences in the movement of the assemblage point. He added that what is proposed by the way of knowledge is a change of values in how we understand our social interaction as a species. Pulling our energy out from everyday life and concentrating it on situations which require that intensive way of living. It is about returning man to marvel, to power, to what he has dreamt about, to reconnect him with astonishment and the capacity to create. That rupture is the only thing which can liberate our luminosity from our perceptual uniformity. the movements of the assemblage point. On another occasion, talking to a small group of friends, Carlos explained that another effect of the movement of the assemblage point is that things acquire new forms. The clarity of appearances gives way to a deeper and more essential clarity, and live beings adopt the form of an enormous, round fields of light. He said that the luminous configuration of a man or woman is a portrait of their existence. Seers look at each detail, and in that way, they determine whether a person is prepared for apprenticeship or not. Most people mistreat their tonal. In consequence, their fibers fall like the pleats of an old curtain. Those tired fibers work as a kind of glue, blocking the natural course of energy. Don Juan called them tonal bells because they are shaped like that. They are dark and give the impression of a heavy weight. When moving, those fields slither or give brief jumps, as if they are dragging something, or as if the person has put on a bear suit too big for him. In warriors, on the other hand, the pleats have tension. Their cocoons are almost spherical, and they overflow with vigor. The lower part is compact, like a solid rubber ball, and it bounces, lifting off from the ground. When they advance, these globes don't slither sorely, but rather jump with joy, and sometimes drift over a long distance. Don Juan called them precisely that, the planers, and said it was a pleasure to bump into one of them on the street. But only seers are able to redesign their luminosity in such a way that they can take completely off from the earth and fly. Some are able to break their limits, which is perceived as if those warriors have ruptured the skin which imprisoned their energy, exposing the radiant central core. They are traveling sorcerers, and they don't depend on their physical body to be aware and to act anymore. The task of an apprentice is to recenter his energy body through acts of impeccability and force that lead to the movement of the assemblage point. Above all, he should achieve mobility for his energy, making it flow in a natural way. In that way, his fibers stretch out and begin to shine with an amber shade. Perception takes place in a point of intense white light that is generally rigidly fixed inside a very specific area, which sorcerers call the human band. That point aligns emanations we receive from the outside with those which are found inside our luminous field, much as an antenna picks up radio waves and transforms them into sound. To our surprise, he assured us that to see that point is a relatively simple matter, which happens already in the early stages of the path. It's enough to suggest it in the appropriate way. An apprentice should never say, "I'm useless. I don't see anything but the opposite." But the opposite. I might see it. Yes, there it is. If we repeat that intent over and over, sooner or later, the assemblage point will enter into our perceptive field, and that is the first step towards moving it deliberately. One in the group asked him how we could witness our own perception. He explained that since we have no way of perceiving anything if it does not pass through the assemblage point, the only way of understanding this matter is to say that the point perceives itself. Whatever we see is the result of its operation. Because of that, we have the sensation of a flame burning where our emanations join with those from the outside. He said that we might equally well describe the phenomenon in auditory terms or as an electric crack that signals alignment. The important thing is to verify it for yourselves, because that will put you beyond the mind. It will fill you with silent knowledge. The mere act of seeing it has an impact which moves the fixation of the assemblage point. He continued by saying that an experienced sorcerer is able to displace his attention very far from the human band. This enlarges the reach of his perception considerably. Some go on a trip to the realm of the inorganic beings. That alignment is very gratifying for his energy, and the traveler returns home renewed. Others have an inclination to go to the lower area, the area of the beast, the most sordid corner of awareness. For human beings, that is a dangerous place, because to remain there for a long period can produce physical lesions. They asked him where the self stays while the assemblage point moves to the low area. He answered, "It seems you are thinking that the assemblage point fits inside your inventory of reasonable things, but that's not so. Don't see it as a solid object or as another part of your body. We don't have an assemblage point. We are it." While a warrior is imprisoned within the limits of the human form, the furthest place he can transfer his assemblage point is to an area of interpretive vacuum, which new seers call limbo. That is a real space on the frontier of the other world, a transition area on the periphery of the other attention. These movements accumulate and serve to condense our personal power until they finally crystallize in a kind of luminous matrix that Don Juan called the dreaming positions. Through exploration of those positions, the individual experience of a sorcerer leaves the human groove and becomes practically limitless. The movement of the assemblage point is not just propelled by an interest in accessing astonishing visions, but is above all directed by the fact that each controlled displacement liberates enormous quantities of energy. Ideally, the warrior applies his unbending intent and lights up his energy field as if he becomes one gigantic assemblage point to witness everything once and for all. In that case, the point shoots out and up. The traveler becomes a blast of light, and he never recovers his form again. This is the greatest challenge, the union of our awareness with infinity.